Okay. All right. So I want to welcome Alistair and Wiremu to this gathering, and I want to start with a prayer and to say to the spirits of this place and to invite the spirits of your place to join us in this magical electronic way that spirits probably understand much better than we do. But I just invite good energy to come from this gathering, and I ask the spirits to make this sacred, to make it holy, to make our meeting together of benefit to the people who will hear us later on, and of benefit to us and to the people whose lives we touch, to the people whose lives are intermingled with our lives. And I ask the collective gathering of spirits, both here in Maine and there in New Zealand, to guide us in a good way and to help us to do the very best for the people that we serve, and to do it in a good way, and to be enriched and enlivened and invigorated and to have more to give than we thought we ever had. So I say thank you to all the spirits who have gathered, the ancestors, um, the directions, sky, the earth. Thank you so much for our lives, for this opportunity to be together, and for good friendship. So shall we sing? We're going to sing a song. The shared wisdom, yes. Homatakiasi. Hey, hey, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Way, hi, ya, hey, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Way, hi, ya, hey, ya. Way, hi, ya, hey, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Tunkashila wamayan kayo he le mie cha nawajielo he wamayan kayo le mie cha nawajielo he. One more. Way, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Way, hi, ya, hey, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Way, hi, ya, hey, ya, way, hi, ya, hey, ya, ya, way, oh, hey. Tunkashila wamayan kayo he le mie cha nawajielo he wamayan kayo le mie cha nawajielo he. Homitakiasi. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, spirits. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Wiremu and Alistair. So, you guys, I wanted to invite you to say a few words about yourselves and the work that you do together, and then we'll jump into talking about some of the ideas in this amazing book that you guys wrote together, Collaborative and Indigenous Mental Health Therapy. So, who wants to speak first?
I would like Wiremu to speak first. So Wiremu, you need to unmute yourself.
Here we go.
Done. Ai, tēnā rā tātai. Te tuatahi kai te mihi atu rā ki a koe, Lewis. A kōrua ko Barbara I mahi te karakia. Me te waiata a tāhua, tēnā kōrua. First, I just like to acknowledge the beautiful words that you have given for this meeting and the beautiful, beautiful, what we call a kinaki, the icing on the cake, was the giving of the song to support your prayer. It was beautiful. And I think I heard it before the last time we met in Australia somewhere. But kia ora koutou, Alistair, tēnā koe, good morning. Who am I? Actually, I'm from the mountains of New Zealand, as you can see by the way the way I am. I like to think that the work that I do is enhanced by the people that I know, like including the great writer of our book, and people like you guys, Lewis. You know, that just gives us more encouragement to do the work and what we do, and we do it well. Of course, I give all acknowledgement to our Creator, who created the heavens and the earth and all the people thereof in, and going back to the fact that we're spiritual beings experiencing a human existence. So we're all related by spirit, according to what I think. So that's who I am, Wiremu Nia Nia. I am from Gisborne, New Zealand, and I am I don't know what I am. I'd have to let Alistair describe that, because the kumara doesn't speak of its own sweetness. Not that I'm sweet. But anyway, kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou. That's me.
Your turn, Alastair.
I ngā mana, I ngā reo, I ngā hauewha, tēnā koutou, Maori ora kia koutou katoa. So, I want to join with Wiremu in greeting everyone on this course. Greeting you, Barbara, and you, Lewis. I want to thank you, Lewis, for a very beautiful prayer, which I think set the scene wonderfully for this kōrero, or this chance to share some stories and to talk together about the different types of work that we do. So, my name's Alastair Bush. I am a Pākehā New Zealander. That means a European New Zealander. I have had the privilege of working with Wiremu in different ways over the last 15 years. And my job is that I'm employed as a doctor, as a psychiatrist working with children and teenagers in an Indigenous Maori mental health service in Porirua, which is near Wellington, New Zealand. Now, it's possible that some of our listeners may be a bit unclear about where New Zealand is. And if that's the case, I can say that New Zealand is a nation in the South Pacific. We have two main islands, and we have our Indigenous people are Maori, and the significant populations of Maori in the North Island of New Zealand, and Wiremu comes, as he was saying, from three particular tribal areas in the North Island, and we just had I had the good fortune of meeting Wiremu when within a month of starting at Te Whare Mārie, which is the Māori service I work for. And so I'm wondering, is that enough by way of introduction, Lewis?
I think
Anything else
so.
I should add? Yeah.
No, we'll throw in a few tidbits here and there, since you'll never sing your own praises as well as we can. So, yeah, why don't we launch into what we're going to talk about? And um, so, the couple, well, so many things in your book spoke to me, and I thought maybe we could begin by talking about Maori, Mana, and Tapu, because I thought those seemed like really important concepts. And of course, feel free to talk about anything you want to, because this is, that's the best. Whatever spirit whispers in your inner ear, you should say. So, regardless of what I ask, but maybe that could launch us, get us started. Would be these concepts from the Maori people.
So I'm wondering, Wiremu, how we should best do this. Something that we've sometimes done is that I'm happy to tell a story about how I first came across these concepts in working with Wiremu, and then maybe Wiremu could describe some more detail about the concepts. That could be
Yes.
one way.
Hmm.
Does that sound all right with you, Wiremu?
I actually think you should do it all, but I'll go with whatever you think.
Okay, so and by the way, Lewis, feel free to steer us in a different direction if you would like to. But um, sometimes Wiremu and I, when we're speaking together, we end up having a bit of a tussle about who should be speaking, because I think he should be doing the speaking, and he's often inviting me to do the speaking. But anyway, so Wiremu and I both started working at our Māori service in about 2005, within about a month of each other. And I got to know Wiremu fairly early on. He helped me learn a karakia, or prayer in the Māori language. He helped me to figure out the best way of greeting Māori families. And he was very kind. But when it came to understanding the kind of work that he was doing in our service, he was employed as a cultural therapist. But I had very little idea what that meant. And even though we were in team meetings together every week, over the first 2 or 3 years that we were working together, I would say that I had no idea what he was doing in his work, what his work as a cultural therapist meant. And it was only when I noticed several families where we were having considerable difficulties engaging with the family, even though we were a Māori service, even though we had Māori practitioners, apart from myself, obviously, working in the teams, these families were not wanting to meet with us. They were rejecting assistance. And so what I noticed was that one of our nurses then took Wiremu along to meet with the family, and suddenly there was a total shift in attitude from the family, and they were very happy to have us involved. And I was puzzled about what had happened in these situations. And so I would go and ask Wiremu, can you explain what happened? And he would say, well, nothing really happened. I don't really know what you're referring to. And so I got more curious, of course. And eventually I said to Wiremu, well, I would really like to understand more about your work and how you work. And I asked him if it would be okay for us to work together with some young people, so I could actually sit in the room and see what Wiremu was doing. Now, it took me some years to realise that Wiremu was working as a Māori healer, because he never called himself that. And there's a word in New Zealand for a Māori expert or healer, which is tohunga, and Wiremu never called himself that. And it was years later that some of my colleagues said, well, of course that's what he is. But I would just like to describe one situation of a young person who came to our service, and it illustrates the concepts of Maori, Mana and Tapu that you raised, Lewis. And so this was a young person who was about 17 at the time. He was still at high school, or what we call college. And he, one day, he was running a bit late for school, and he came out of the door of his house. And as he came to his front gate, he saw a very frightening image above the letterbox of what he thought was a Maori man yelling at him. And he was learning the Maori language at school, and he knew that he was yelling at him in the Maori language. And he panicked and ran back inside. And the next time when he realized he was late to school and he was going to have to run out, go and get the bus, this would have been like 10 or 15 minutes later, he had another go, walked out, and the same man was standing by the letterbox shouting at him. And he was so frightened by this, he did eventually manage to run past his letterbox and make it to school, but he was terrified and began to have panic attacks and was very anxious. And so his Maori teacher at school, the Maori language teacher, figured out that something was wrong and asked him what was happening. And she considered that there was a Maori cultural problem going on, and she organised for a Maori healer to visit the school and provide karakia, which is a prayer, and the Maori healer threw some blessed water on him, and the visions disappeared. Now, when this young person was referred to our service because he was still having the panic problem, he met with Wiremu, and it was subsequently that I had a chance to ask Wiremu about this situation, and I was puzzled to understand how to make sense of this, because my training is in medicine and psychiatry, and I guess in the Western methods, which of course you would understand, Lewis, from your background in psychiatry as well. And there was no cultural landmarks for me to help me understand the situation. And when I talked to Wiremu, he said, well, if you want to understand this situation, it would be useful for you to understand the concept of Maori. So Maori, he said, is, and Wiremu will explain this in more detail in a moment, but he said Maori is like life force. But a person can have life force, but also an object could potentially have life force. So, for example, if a person is holding something close, like, for example, this is a piece of pounamu or greenstone, but the Māori word is pounamu, and I wear it close to my chest, and Wiremu would say that over time, this object will pick up my Māori, my life force. And so Wiremu said, if you understand this, then you'll understand why my first question for this young person was, you know, when I found out what was going on, when I found out he'd been seeing this warrior male Māori character shouting at him, my first question to him was, what did you do? And during that inquiry, the young person revealed that a couple of weeks before the warrior first started appearing in his life, he had picked up a piece of greenstone or pounamu off the road. And it was a beautifully carved piece of greenstone, and he put it around his neck. And so Wiremu said, that's the answer to this puzzle. And so, of course, from my point of view as a psychiatrist, it's very hard to make sense of that. I've got no idea why picking up a piece of pounamu could lead to someone having visions of a Māori man shouting at them. But Wiremu said it's to do with understanding Māori. So if that pounamu has the Māori or the life force of somebody's ancestor on it, then the pounamu belongs to that person, and then they've lost it, and it was on the road, and then someone else picks it up. Then the Maori on the greenstone will, which is connected to the person who owns it, to their ancestors, will be, I guess the ancestors could be upset that this person has just picked up their pounamu. And as a result, the person's ancestor may well have appeared to that young person and told them off. And so I guess that's an example that illustrates the expression mauri that you were asking about. The other thing is that by picking, so if we're understanding tapu as something sacred or forbidden, and there is a tapu about that pounamu, the young person picks it up and they have breached that tapu, and so the ancestor is concerned about that. Now I'm wondering if I could hand over to Wiremu now to explain more about what you understood in relation to that young person, Wiremu, and further explanation of those concepts.
Ah, that was very, very nice, Alistair. You could have just done it all yourself. The thing about Maori being a life force, it's described as life force in the dictionary even, or translated. The thing with Maori, if you pull the word apart, it means ma, uri. The word ma means by, and uri means by connection or by relationship. So when I talk about life force, I would say that ma uri, which gives me a connection to the divine, to our creator, that's my connection to the creator. And when I say my connection to my mountains, my connection to my rivers, which gives me sustenance, my connection to the meeting houses, to the places where we live, and my connection to my family, and then my relations, and then to our tribe. That is Maori. That's where my life force comes from. So if I have that ownership or that connection, it's like somebody taking off sweaty shoes and me putting my feet straight into those shoes. The residue from that person having sweated in those shoes, it's still there. So when you're wearing something like this close to your skin for so long, and then somebody else picks it up, you're picking up that residue of how this object or taonga has laid against my skin. And so you're actually taking on board my part of me. And so in our culture, the ancestors, my long line of ancestors, go back to the beginning. So this represents my ancestors as well. And that's what happened to this young man. Is that enough?
And would you be able to explain the relevance of tapu in that situation, and also the mana that relates to that?
Thank you. Okay, now the tapu is that if I have a divine connection to the Creator, then I have a sacredness by my divine connection to the Creator. And in that connection, I also have an authority given by my divine connection. So it follows that I am connected because of my Maori, that's my connection. I am sacred because of that connection, and I also have authority to that connection. I have authority by that connection, which means that I am a sacred being, and nobody can come into my space unless I give you permission. And the mana is I have the authority to be selective about what I allow into my space. I don't have to accept. I have the authority to rise above sickness, my circumstances, and so that is my life force, my connection to the divine spirit. Okay?
So, Lewis, is it okay if I just add a little bit in order to then ask Wiremu a little bit more about that?
Absolutely.
So, this young person met with Wiremu, and he was still, even though the visions had stopped because of the karakia from the Maori healer who had visited him in the school, this young person was still panicking because he didn't understand what was going on. And so Wiremu set about explaining to him the nature of the situation and helping him understand his circumstances and why this cultural problem had cropped up, in order that the young person might understand it. And with that awareness, then he could feel less anxious because he understood it, and he could know in the future how to manage those kind of situations. And so Wiremu explained to him about Maori and about tapu, and the importance of not breaching something tapu which might be sacred or forbidden. And he explained to him some ways of looking after himself spiritually to manage those kind of things in the future. So I guess one of the things I noticed in starting to work with Wiremu was the way he took so much care to explain things to family. And he also said, you know, if you understand these concepts of, you know, Maori, mana and tapu, then you can make sense of a number of things which might seem very strange and mysterious otherwise. And so in order to illustrate the concept of mana a little bit more, there have been a number of young people that we've met with over the years where they were suffering from something that looked like quite a strange, maybe psychiatric sort of problem. So for example, there was a young, a 17-year-old guy called George who started to have strange seizure-like episodes where it looked like he was having some kind of seizure, but it wasn't epilepsy, and he was still awake. And at the same time, he started to hear a voice telling him he was a bad person, that he might as well kill himself, things like that. And of course, a lot of psychiatrists in that kind of situation would be concerned that there might be a psychotic illness and that this might be a reason to prescribe psychiatric medication. But this young person, when Wiremu and when I had an opportunity to offer for this young person to meet with Wiremu, and the family were very keen to, Wiremu identified that there was a negative spiritual entity that appeared to be impinging on George and causing him to experience these symptoms. And so the interesting thing about that situation was that Wiremu spent quite a bit of time explaining to George about how he could strengthen his own mana, so how he could strengthen his own spiritual authority so that he would be able to reject this entity without necessarily relying on Wiremu for that. And so he explained to him about, in particular, mana, but also the other concepts. And so the idea was, if this young person could get really clear that he was in charge of his own space, that he would be in a position to tell this entity to get lost, to get out of his space. And the process of that, alongside Wiremu's support and the karakia or prayer, enabled him to heal himself. And so one of the things that I've noticed about Wiremu's work is that he will support families to find their own healing, which is a kind of a different process from the usual psychiatric one that I'm familiar with, and which many people will be familiar with, certainly you are, Lewis, where you know, the psychiatrist is the expert and we prescribe a pill and that's supposed to fix a problem, although often seems like it doesn't. So I'm wondering, Wiremu, if you would be able to just say, make some comments about your experience of working with George and how that relates to the concept of mana.
You're making it very difficult now, but yes, I'll try. I think one of the first things is that the thing about mana is having that authority. It also means that you should be respectful, you should value people, objects, land, whatever it is in front of you, you should value them. And so what I like to try and teach these young people is that, or teach anybody, well, tell anybody, is that anybody who comes into our space, we should respect them. We should give them that, or acknowledge that they come from a long line of other chiefs. And so it doesn't matter where they've come from at the time of the session or what has happened to them, we should always give them that respect. And that way I ensure that I uphold my own mana, which is my honour, my authority, and by doing that, I'm bestowing upon them the honour that I carry. And so in that way, it honours them as well. But the thing is that when I look for anything, first and foremost, I look to the spiritual part, because a lot of times that these young people, when I talk about them carrying their ancestors, they carry the ancestors with them, is that there's that saying that the cry of a woman in giving birth pierces the spiritual realm, which means it opens up the heavens and brings safety to that particular birthing process. And so it's said that the first thing that happens is that for a woman is from that cry of pain, then comes the second part, which is the flowing of that water, which is called taura, which means pathway. It flows out, and it says that for out of the belly shall flow rivers of living water. That means the rivers is the genealogy of the line of ancestors that have come, and the living water is the spirit. So from each generation, from your mother, her mother, her mother, her mother, her mother, has given water. The water has to flow from the belly in order that it might give life. So we're actually in a stream of life that flows down. And anything that is polluted or gets contaminated above us in the generations flows down and affects the generations below. Now, so I tend to look at the spiritual side of anything first. And then knowing that this young fella has picked up this ponam and put it against his skin, he has now taken on the generations of the person who it belonged to. And he was carrying those people around with him, and they did not belong to him. So what I had to explain to him is that it was like the sweaty shoe thing, that for every action we do, there is a consequence. So if we pick something up that does not belong to us, there is a consequence for that. And that's what I said to him, that if you pick this up, there's got to be a consequence for that. So the end result is that we got rid of that we just took it and put it back to the land, and or back to wherever he got it from, and he came right. And that's I hope that's what you wanted me to do, Alistair.
That was lovely. And I'm wondering if you can also comment on George, who is a different young person and who was affected by the sort of seizure-like episodes and the voice, and explain what you experienced when we met with George and what the solution to that was. Wiremu, you're on mute.
Thank you. Then I had the first part wrong, so now I can correct it. Can you hear me now? Good. This this young man, I noticed when he came in, I noticed there was a female entity that actually was with him. And if you remember, I asked his mother, was there some crosswords they've had with somebody in their family, particularly a female? And she said, oh yes, I remember she had an argument with her auntie. So what happens is they talk about unresolved generational stuff. The sins of the forefathers they talk about are things that haven't been resolved in the generations above affect the generations below. So in this particular case, this was the same generation, but what happened is that his mum had an argument with her auntie, and it had not been resolved as yet, and it had come down and affected George. So all that needed doing was for her to go back to reconcile, apologize, and let the auntie, because the auntie was the oldest one in the line, so was to go and pacify the auntie who unintentionally put these things on her niece or nephew, grandnephew. So she had no idea that she had done that. It was unintentional. But it was a fact that an argument had caused that the sins of the forefathers, or foremothers, or fore aunties in this case, would visit upon the generations below. Man, I think I'm confusing you, but that's what I reckon anyway.
And thank you, Wiremu. And would you mind just explaining what was the importance of mana in relation to George and him getting back to well-being?
Okay, what I explained to George was that by our divine connections, we are sacred beings who have been given authority not to accept our circumstances, not to accept illness, and certainly to have the authority to ask these negative energies to get out of our space. So I just had to talk to him about his mana, that authority, and really instill in him the fact that he was a rangatira, or a chief, that came from a chiefly line. So he carried the generations of that with him as well as the connection to the divine creator. And he got it. He got it. And so they were able to, once the mum had gone and dealt with the auntie to say or apologize, that entity had to leave. Came back a couple of times, I think, according to some of the kōrero, but he managed to actually use his authority to get rid of it. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so we've been in touch with George 7 years later, and he has continued to do really well. And that's as a result of Wiremu's intervention. And he had actually been on some antipsychotic medication as well, and he just stopped that after seeing Wiremu. And he stopped the antipsychotic medication, but things got considerably better after that. And I'm confident it was Wiremu's intervention, and so is he, and so is his mum confident about that. So, Lewis, that's a bit of a starting point in relation to responding to your question about Maori, tapu, and mana. I'm wondering, where would you like us to take this conversation now?
Well, there was another concept that really appealed to me in the book, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, but Te Tahono, am I close? Um, Let that which has been joined remain intact. And you guys talk about, there is a saying, Epiti hono te tai hono. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but could you guys talk a little bit about that active process of reparation, reconciliation, collaboration, connection, um, which seems like so important toward healing.
So, Wiremu, how about you explain Tātai Hono, and then maybe I can explain a bit about our working together.
Tātai hono is a term used, we use it when somebody departs this earth. Apiti hono tātai hono is just giving credence to the fact that once somebody has departed, they have gone to be with the spirits. So we talk about let the living remain with the living and let the dead depart back to the spiritual realm. That's what tātai hono means. It means let that which has been bound remain bound, or that which we bind, let it remain bound. And it talks about that the living will go on living and the dead will be with the spirits. And so it is the same in terms of reconciliation. There is another Maori saying that te taura mai tai kai motu te whānau e kore e motu. It means that even a steel chain can break through metal fatigue. But the bonds of a family, the bonds can never be broken, which means you can have arguments and you can be estranged from one another for years. But the bond of that blood and the family can never be broken. So it's the same with tātai hono. It means that bond, let it remain, never let it be broken. And basically that's what that means. Yes, I think unless you want some more else.
Would you mind saying something about why you thought that was an appropriate way of talking about our collaboration and this way of collaborating?
You really are making it difficult for me now. I think that if we looked at everything in the sense of, it's like you and I have a type of a bond. We've worked together long enough for me to absolutely trust that you could have done this. Mind you, I'm glad I've seen Lewis and Barbara again and Dakota, but it's that thing of trusting. It's about building a bond. It means the word hono means to join or to bond. Tātai hono means cemented. It just gives it that extra, like adding concrete in with metal or something. But I think that it's like everything. Like if you really have a passion for something, then that's a type of tātai hono. Because you're not going to let it go. You're not going to let it go past you. You're going to pursue it because you have that full passion to do that. The tātai hono, to hold and fast, regardless of whatever cost it has to you, or how difficult it is at times, how many obstacles you have to cross to get there. But that gives it that, let that which is found remain. Is that enough?
Thank you, Wiremu. That's lovely. And I guess part of your question, Lewis, is about this idea of working together, where we're coming from totally different paradigms. So my training in medicine and psychiatry means that I'm coming from a so-called scientific way of thinking, that if you know, the greatest truth is from looking down a microscope and making things smaller and thinking that we know what chemical we're dealing with. Whereas Wiremu's coming from a totally different paradigm, where his paradigm is that spirituality is fundamental to everything, whereas in my paradigm in psychiatry, that usually doesn't get a look in. Of course, these are things that our listeners will be understanding from an Indigenous point of view, that generally Indigenous knowledge has been put down or sidelined or silenced by Western ways of thinking. And so there are significant challenges in Wiremu and I working together. If I am a psychiatrist, a medical practitioner, and Wiremu is a Maori healer, and in New Zealand, similar to the US and Canada and other places, there have been many ways in which Indigenous knowledge has been silenced and sidelined, over the last centuries. For example, over 100 years ago in New Zealand, there was a law in the country making it illegal to practice Maori healing. And that came about in certain circumstances, but one of the results was that Maori healers had to go underground in New Zealand, and so it appeared that Maori healing disappeared from sight. Now, those laws were repealed in the 1960s, but as our listeners will know, there is a very long history of colonisation, whether that be in the United States or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or many other places that were colonised by, particularly by European countries. And that colonisation process is there in the therapy room every time we meet with an Indigenous person. And that history is there. And it's of course different if you're an Indigenous practitioner. Your relationship will be different. So if Wiremu and I are working together, it's not just a matter of being two nice guys working together who get on well, but we have to know that our history of the relationship between our cultures is there in the room with us. And so part of what Wiremu's saying is that in order to deal with this difficult history, I can't be paralyzed by it as a white European psychiatrist, by the fact that my culture has, there have been so many injustices that my culture has contributed to. I can't be paralyzed by that, but I have to be mindful of that. And so it would be very, and Wiremu's inviting me to do more of the talking. Well, that's problematic as well. I imagine you would much rather see and hear from Wiremu, and he keeps saying that I'm causing difficulty for him by inviting him to talk. I know that's what people want to do. They want to hear Wiremu, not me. So part of I find this metaphor, tātai hono, beautiful, because there's so much depth to it. The relationship that Wiremu and I have, and that you as an Indigenous practitioner might have with your senior Indigenous person or with other colleagues, there needs to be a particular strength in that relationship to withstand the history, for example, between my people and Wiremu's peoples, for us to find a way through so that we can work together in the best interests of young people that we're working with families, with all of our clients, if you like. So So I guess that's another aspect of what Tātai Hono's referring to, is there's a whole history to this partnership that's important to understand. And you know, Wiremu and I we've had disagreements, or we've had misunderstandings, or Wiremu's been hugely patient with me when I ask him 100 questions to try and understand from my Western Pākehā point of view a concept which is deeply spiritual and significant, and which I'm very ignorant about. Wiremu has been so patient. He'll listen to the questions, he'll keep explaining, and that, I guess, that forbearance has been such an important gift for me in terms of my learning and helping me understand a little bit more about where he's coming from, and how can we help young people from both the points of view, so that they can benefit from some knowledge that psychiatry or psychology or counselling might give them, that they can also benefit from Māori healing knowledge and the concepts that come from that.
No,
Lewis, I'm sure that's enough from me.
I think it's really interesting because the name of this course is Two-Eyed Counseling, and we're endeavoring to cultivate what you and Wiremu have, and to present the idea that different and equal, one does not dominate the other, and probably somewhere along the line you got dropped on your head, because I don't know many psychiatrists who could be as respectful as you were to what Wiremu was doing. Most of my colleagues wouldn't even notice that he met with people and they improved. So what happened to you? Did your mother drop you on your head, or get kicked by a cow? What happened to you?
I'm not sure, but I certainly felt that in my early years working in our Māori service, that there were some families that we were having great difficulty with, that, difficulty from the point of view of how do we engage with these families? How do we, they've got needs, they're dealing with considerable adversity. There's issues of poverty and maybe some family violence and plenty of other things. And somehow the connection wasn't happening. And so it was pretty dramatic to me seeing these situations where things would turn around. And I guess the other thing is, over the years, I've been interested in spirituality, but felt that I didn't know how to translate this into clinical work, really. And what was beautiful about sitting down with Wiremu was he was able to give me beautiful explanations, and he was able to teach me concepts that would open up kind of like a whole vista, a whole door to a different way of thinking about someone's distress. So I think probably I don't want to liken my relationship to Wiremu with being kicked by a cow, but I do think that the relationship has, because we get on really well, and because he was prepared to give me the time of day, he was prepared to try and respond to these very difficult questions because they were coming from a totally different paradigm. He would explain to me, this young person with the piece of pounamu that he picked up off the road, he said to me, this is like a spiritual germ. So what he was doing was he was using a medical metaphor to help a doctor understand a spiritual Māori problem. And so what fantastic teaching. And so I think he was prepared to persist. 10 years after I'd started asking him ignorant questions, he was still prepared to sit down and give me the time of day and try and answer the question, even though it was the 10th time that I hadn't got it. he was still prepared to. So, you know, Wiremu had so much forbearance. I think that's probably a different kind of being kicked by a cow.
He probably noticed that you have quality ancestors.
He's never made any comments about my ancestors, but maybe he's been restrained.
Here's your chance, Wiremu, to make some comments about his ancestors.
I'll tell you what, I'm too in awe by the way they wear those little skirt things. What do you call them? The
Kilts?
dresses. Kilts.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, because we wear them too, you know. And I thought straight away, we've got to be related. So,
Two guys in dresses have to be
yes,
related.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's some powerful dudes from the ancient days of Scotland. So, so we probably should start moving toward. I was going to talk about decolonizing counseling, but I think you guys have really hit on that because you know part of it, part of decolonizing counseling, from what I got from you guys, is the mutual respect, you know, and the respect of indigenous knowledge, and not the subservience of indigenous knowledge to psychiatry, to biomedicine, and and also the emphasis on relationship, you know, and it it seems to me that relationship is everything. Connectedness is everything. You know, that all healing comes, you know, from that. And so before we stop, I wanted to invite you to reflect a bit. Many of our counselors who are listening work with people who are addicted. And last week we had some wonderful teachings from Eduardo Duran about uh, respecting the spirit of the substance, you know, and being cognizant that whatever medicine uh, we take in its spirit, and some ideas like that. And I wondered if there's anything that you guys, both of you, would share with our counselors who are working with people who are struggling with addictions, um, moving them toward more indigenous ways of managing, more indigenous ways of approaching addictions. And I know you're going to both fight over who speaks first.
Well, because um, I know that it's a hopeless situation, I'll just make a couple of comments. But and I wish that I could have heard the talk with Eduardo Lewis, and I'm hoping to actually look it up on the website if I can. But I also just want to acknowledge the really important territory that all of your listeners, all of our listeners are working in. You know, working with Indigenous people, whether it be with people who are struggling with substances or struggling with other problems or difficulties in their life. It's incredibly important work, and especially to be able to provide an Indigenous perspective and to be able to access Indigenous knowledge and to be able to just, I guess, touch on the people that you're working with their Indigenous perspectives. And so in relation to your question about addictions, when we met with George, who I was talking about before, the young person with the seizure-like episodes and with the voice he was experiencing, Wiremu referred to one of his views about what happened for George, that it related to an unresolved a conflict that had come down the generations from a great aunt of his. But there was another thing that had happened, which is that he'd started smoking marijuana about 6 months before. So there was an addiction aspect to this. And Wiremu had a lovely way of describing to this young person why it wasn't a good idea for him to carry on smoking marijuana. And so Wiremu, I'm wondering if you can explain what you said to George.
I think basically what I said is, and I say it to a lot of people I work with, especially, there's a text that talks about alienation in the mind, pushes you away from reality or what's real. And sometimes that could be by some deficiency and chemical or a knock on the head. And it's often said sometimes by evil works, which is sexual abuse, physical and mental abuse, and often in our culture, by the sins of the forefathers visiting upon the generations below, and because it hasn't been resolved, it becomes a curse that follows you down the generations. So what happened is that I talked to them about any substance that alters the mind opens a doorway to the spiritual realm. And anything from that side of, we have our earthly realm, there's a spiritual realm. Anything from the spiritual realm, for the generations that have passed, good or bad, can come back through that doorway. Come back with voices telling you what to do, how to do it, whether you should hurt yourself. Voices just pouring through. And often you can't distinguish between what's real and what's not, or there's so many noises you can't select. Like we can probably hear 3 different things going on around us and able to think that's my wife speaking, that's the kettle boiling, that's a car going past. Whereas with the door being open, jammed open by a mind-altering substance, is just brrr. You can't tell the difference. Anyway, so I asked him, I said to him, you have to stop because you're a gifted young man. You have to stop doing what you're doing in order for you to be able to close the door, which means you only open it to the things that you select. So he stopped smoking dope.
And what I noticed, and I've noticed that every time Wiremu and I have met with a young person, I could tell lots of young people that it's not a good idea to smoke marijuana from the point of view, especially if they have a spiritual gift, which Wiremu was referring to. But it's been much more powerful for Wiremu to explain that to them. I've noticed that's much more influential than me as a psychiatrist telling someone to stop smoking cannabis. And yeah, but and especially that explanation about opening up the spiritual doorway, and then they've got much less control about what difficult material from the other side is coming through. This has been it seems like it's been quite a powerful explanation for young people, and they've often taken notice of that. And I guess in relation to that, the issue of young people and adults and children recognizing when they do have spiritual awareness and the need to look after that. And Wiremu, I'm wondering if you can just talk about that, because I actually think there are a lot of young people and adults who become caught up with substance use because actually they've got some spiritual awareness and they just don't know how to manage that or deal with that. And that's kind of a bit of your specialty area. Wiremu, would you comment on that?
I think that is the fact that we try and block a lot of things out that are harassing us or creating some distress or difficulty for us. And we tend to think that we can block it out by taking something else to give us a good feeling, to give us a high feeling, and it has the reverse effect. It's like somebody who has just broken a relationship, who goes out and gets on the booze, who goes out and drinks, trying to quell that breaking heart. Whereas in fact, we know that alcohol and that is actually, it makes you worse. It makes you worse. So it's the same when they think that they're trying to block out voices or block out trauma that has happened in their lives by altering the mind, where in fact it's opening another doorway up where voices can pour through saying, actually, you should kill yourself. You're not good to anybody. You're worthless. You're no good. Kill yourself. So they don't realize that by opening up that doorway, these things, then they really are there. These yucky things can come through and tell them how to, and influence them to hurt themselves.
And Wiremu, would you just mind commenting on matakiti and just explaining that from your point of view?
Okay. Matakiti is the ability to see the unseen, or to have knowledge of something that is taking place with the person, whoever's having difficulty or is in distress. So the word matekete, if you break that word up, I love breaking words up, pulling them apart and analysing each bit, but matekete, ma, by, te, the, kite means to see. By the seen, one would have knowledge. By that knowledge, one would find a way. So it's saying that the unseen, if you can get knowledge of the unseen, the things that are happening around a person that they haven't told you, and in a lot of cases able to say, oh, have you been to the doctor for that spot on your lung? Or there's something wrong with the kidney on the left-hand side. Straight away, that's going to build a faith in a person that, wow, there really is a thing like spirituality. There really is a doorway that I need to shut. So that is actually a tool or a gimmick that can be used to insist or to encourage young people to stop doing what they're doing that's not good for them, especially with the mind. Is that enough? Good.
Very good.
And also that concept also, Wiremu often uses it to refer to the spiritual gifts that young people have. Now, Lewis, I'm wondering how we're going for time and where are we up to?
Well, I think we're probably coming to the end because we probably have more than we can actually show. So I think we're probably ready to close, but I'd like to offer both of you guys a chance to summarize or to say anything that you forgot that you want to put across, or any closing remarks from both of you. Of course, you have to go first, Alistair, because he always makes you go first.
Thanks, Lewis. Look, for me, this has been a privilege and an honour, and I've really enjoyed being part of this conversation and seeing you both, Lewis and Barbara, but also thinking about the audience. And I guess what I would like to say to the audience is that it matters so much having Indigenous counsellors. And I notice this because I work in an Indigenous service, and it makes a huge difference for the young people and families that we work with to have Indigenous counsellors, therapists, psychologists, social workers to work with, because they have a sense that their situation can be understood in a way that it's not the same when they meet with someone like me, even just because I come from a different worldview, and including with my medical training, and people want to be able to benefit from that, and I think that's important, but it's not the same as working with an Indigenous practitioner. And so I just want to really acknowledge the work that you're all doing, and just grateful to have this opportunity to share. For me, it's always a pleasure to share the work that Wiremu does, and the privilege I've had to work alongside him sometimes. Yeah, it feels like a real privilege. And I just want to thank you, Lewis, for this opportunity, and Barbara as well.
I have a quick question, which is just, have you ever really disagreed with each other, and what happens when you do?
Do you want to go first, Wiremu?
Yeah, let's have Wiremu go first.
Oh, you're muted, Wiremu.
Yes, we have had a disagreement, heaps of disagreements. The disagreements are that I don't want to go first when we're talking or presenting. I disagree that there is a need to have me around when we have these conferences. I think for me is that the tātai hono part is that when you give trust, it's to the death. This is what I'm saying. Tātai hono means to the death. So I keep telling this fellow over here, you can do it. You know just as much as I do about cultural stuff now. And he still doesn't want to do it. And I respect that. But I will always argue about it, but I respect it. That's probably the only disagreement that we've ever had. I don't know. And there are things that he's wanted me to do or talk about that I've disagreed with, but those are only little minor things. So back to you, Alistair.
Thanks for that lovely question, Barbara. I think that there are many things that we might have disagreed on. Certainly, I've been skeptical of all kinds of things that Wiremu has said. Often I've been shocked by things that he's come up with, even in a session with a family. And usually what he's done is he said, that's all right. Could you go and check this out with the family in 3 months' time? And so in 6 months' time, when I finally got a message from the family, I've discovered that what he said in the first place was spot on, and it totally threw me out. And so he's got me to follow up on the things that I was totally puzzled and confused by. But the thing about working together as a psychiatrist, I can be a psychiatrist, and Wiremu can be himself as a Maori healer, and we don't have to agree on everything. We can hold our own perspectives, and provided we've got mutual respect, we can work together. And I can say, well, I don't see it from that point of view, but I respect the fact that you do, and I think this is going to be more important for the family that they hear from Wiremu. Whereas from my point of view as a psychiatrist, this is what I might recommend, but we can have different points of view, and that's fine. If that's okay with you, Wiremu.
Well, I think we probably have to call it an evening or a morning where you guys are. So I just want to thank you so much. And I know that the words that you've spoken will be inspirational for so many of the counselors taking the course, and they're certainly inspirational for me. And I love being around you guys. I'm hoping New Zealand will be open the first week of March, and I'll see you guys in your own hometown. Well, both of us will.
Thank you so much for offering this tonight. Yeah.
Yes, yes. All right, how do you say see you later in Maori?
I'm wondering, Lewis, are you okay to finish with a prayer?
Yes, yes. And since I opened with the prayer, um, could I invite you guys to finish with the prayer?
Wiremu.
Am I unmute? Am I unmuted?
Yes, yes, you're unmuted.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say it's been a privilege and an honor to be here with you guys again. And to the audience, I just wanted to leave this one little thing. Is that because we go and learn all these different scientific stuff, we've got a saying that my wife and I use, and we say, the finger that points to the moon is not the moon. So all the knowledge I've got about where the moon is it still doesn't mean that I'm the moon. What we try and do is connect people to knowledge of where that moon is. And so as counselors, as workers, the people who come into our space should be valued straight off as being sacred and who carry generations of their people with them into that session. And so we should respect them accordingly. Sorry, I've taken that time up. I now will do a prayer to finish. I just wanted to leave that for all you awesome counselors out there who are waiting in the wings to work with people. E pā te matua tuauri, that means Father who is the ancient one, the divine spirit. We just ask that you put your protection around this whole meeting, this whole session. And please put your arms around Lewis and Barbara and Dakota and keep them safe and let them do the most awesome work they can do. And with Alastair too, who I should see at the end of this week. E pā te matua tuauri ko tuku nātu ki a koe nā nawe nā tangi, tukuna mai ki a mātou tō aroha o manaaki tanga muake tonu. We just give this all to you, Lord, knowing that, or Father, knowing that we have your ears, that we can send our cries, our wishes, our hopes, our dreams, and you would have them answered if we just persist. Nō reire pākaroria ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmene. And bless you guys. And the word in Māori for see you again is ka kite anu. Now I'll let you sign.
Ka kite anu. In Lakota, it's doksha ake. All right, well, thank you guys.
Ka kite anu.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we love you very much. And thank you for the wonderful prayers. And may we see you in the flesh before too long.
Soon.
Soon. Soon.
That will be wonderful.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit the end button. So
Thank you,
until
Lewis
next
and
time.
Barbara.
Thank you so much.
Ka kite anō.
Ka
Ka kite
kite.
anu.
Ka kite anu.